Welcome to Between the Vines. That's my cell phone already. I should probably silent it. My name is Kevin Martin. Thanks for joining us. And I'm here with Jennifer Phillips Russo and Andy Musa. We've got the gang back together, and we're going to talk about a couple different things today. I think we've got some potassium deficiency that somebody might have observed walking around, and great berry moth, Drosophila, and some fertilizer issues as well as labor issues. We're going to try to cover it all today as efficiently as we can. Hopefully you guys are already driving around in circles. Maybe by the time this is up, harvesting Niagara, so you won't be in a rush to get through this material. Really like to see more of you. Like to see you guys listen to this podcast on your smartphones and in your tractors, and we're really trying to make this as convenient as possible for you to get as much information as we can without taking up hopefully any of your time, since we know you're going to be stuck in that harvester for a while anyway. Jennifer, do you want to kick it off with some potassium deficiency or?
Sure. So I have been driving around the belt just as checking out everybody's vineyards and doing some berry sampling. And I've also had some growers contact me in regards to blackened, brownish colored leaves and just curious if they were still viable. So as I was looking at them and taking a little bit more notice, it does look like potassium deficiency. So potassium, which doesn't surprise me, by the way, because there's such a huge crop out there. So the bigger the crop you have, the more potassium goes to the fruit ripening and gets pulled out as you harvest. So it's going to take it for that cluster and not for the leaves. It's very mobile inside the plant. So I need you, and this is actually the perfect time between 70 to 100 days post-bloom to go out and do soil and petiole samples or tissue samples to figure out your vine status for your nutrients. And we have recommendations online and the protocols on how to do that if you're interested, or just give me a call. I can walk you through it. But you want to make sure that, and if you're a member of our LERGP, this went out in our crop update, but I just want to kind of give you the levels that you want to look for in those petiole tests. So in your late summer tissue samples, you want to have, if they are less than 0.8% when it comes back for your potassium levels, then there's definitely deficiency and you have the symptoms visible. You need to apply a heavy potassium fertilizer rate, and that is 600 pounds per acre. This information that we give you on our recommendations comes from research that's happened in our field and is actually published in the wine production guide for Northeast America, who the lead author was Tony Wolf, and it came out in 2008. They are actually revising that for a second edition. So they're updating it with more recent research, but these sort of remain the same as far as I am aware of.
So now, Jen, is that 600 pounds of potassium or 600 pounds of potash?
Potash.
Okay.
So it's K2O. Yeah.
Okay.
So then
that would be closer, and I'm not going to do the math, but closer to 300 pounds of actual, if the language you are speaking is actual, but 600 pounds of potash, which is buying. Yeah.
So then, and the best time to do that, if I haven't hammered it in enough, when the vine needs it the most, during rapid shoot growth, is 2 weeks before bloom, up to 4 weeks after bloom. But if you're putting on 600 pounds, I would highly suggest doing that in a split application. Plus, if you see there's rain coming, you might want to get it on just before that. That would be most helpful. So that again is if it's under 0.8% in your tissue samples for late summer tissues. That's now, veraison to harvest. Go out and take those samples. Again, there's large crop out there, so they're going to be taking a lot of potassium out. You're going to need to put more on.
So yeah, this kind of feels like, and I can make it even worse. This feels like when you're 70 years old, you go to the doctor and they say, you've been smoking for the last 40 years. You shouldn't have done that. And now you've got a problem. It's too late. It's too late. But I guess it's not too late for next year. It's not quite like my analogy. You're not going to die.
Right. They're not going to die if you get that potash on.
Right. I guess my concern would be, depending on where you saw it, is there are years where almost no matter what you do, you see potassium deficiency. So, let's say you've got a 12-ton crop and no rainfall. You're just going to see it. And this is not that year. So I'd be interested to know what those cropping levels look like. And I think that would inform my longer term recommendations for what you should do to make sure you don't run into this problem again. I think the easy recommendation is absolutely right, what you said, which is 600 pounds, do it once. But if you don't want to plan on another follow-up application, I think more information is needed, whether it's yet another petiole sample the following year or another slug of potassium that's more than just a maintenance 150 pounds of potash. I mean, if you're looking at a crop that's 18 tons to the acre or something, then that would be different. But you're probably just going to see some potassium deficiency in that situation. But
Or put in irrigation for your Concords. Who's going to do that?
Now, I don't know that we have good research on when a split application makes sense. I know that you're recommending it, and that's totally cool. It's just I definitely wonder where the line is when you should do a split. I think we have some good data on nitrogen, but I don't know if we have good data on when it makes sense to do that for potash.
No, I agree with you. I haven't seen any good data on potash going out.
And sort of to get back to my smoking analogy, like you missed the boat, and I'm sorry. The good news is the thing that's going to save you if you can get this crop ripe with black leaves is that you're going to get paid for it, but you're going to spend more on potassium. So a year ago, potassium was $344 averaged in the U.S. for retail potassium per ton. So a fairly big dose, you'd be looking at $160 an acre. A month ago, it was $469, and last week it was $543. And I would anticipate that it will go up again. I think that short-term trend is going to advance some more. So I'm not saying you should buy 1,200 pounds to the acre now or even 600. I think these prices may inform your decision on whether or not you do a split application, actually. I know you're saying the best time is around bloom. The most common time is during the dormant season. So that may be where the split application happens in that you put down a couple hundred pounds early in the spring and then another 400 pounds around the bloom period. And then maybe prices of potash will fall by then, or maybe they'll go up. But you may want to spread that price risk around, because when there is volatility, it usually makes sense to buy more frequently. And then you probably won't hit the peak twice.
So if you were going to suggest frequent applications, I think I would suggest 2 weeks prior to bloom and then 3 weeks after bloom, not early spring. Why would you suggest early spring when the vine's working off its reserves?
So I don't think we have the research to indicate that it's a total failure when you do it that early, because potash is not as mobile or as volatile as some of the other fertilizers that are used. So I definitely don't have any research to support that it's more efficient to do it the way that I stated. I just know that it's a common practice, and it's not as busy of a time for growers, so it's a little more realistic to try to accomplish it. If you are trying to maximize efficiency, there may be better ways to do it. I do think we probably need to know more. When you say 3 weeks after bloom, I think we do need to know more about how quickly it becomes available to the plant.
Okay,
it could be less. And I'm not saying 2 weeks after. I think we already have some research that indicates 2 weeks after bloom, it's effective. And in terms of efficiency, I'm not sure that that's known. So before I told a grower that they had to do it that way, I'd like to see that research. It may be a better way to do it, and that's probably a good working theory that you've got. But it is very contrary to what is commonly done in Concords in the region. So I don't know that growers would be willing to do that. But I would agree with you and recommend that they try it. And I think we need to know more about where that deficiency is. So the more expensive potash gets, the more we need to know. You go back to the 90s when it was $50 a ton. Who cares? Like, just put it on whenever you have time. I mean, that was the more important analysis. Like, put it on in December, just put on an extra ton. Who cares? You've got the time. It didn't matter. And I don't think the environmental costs were as high either, especially locally. Maybe in a world environment where you're thinking about mining and things like that, but we didn't see the local impact like you would with phosphorus. So now that we're paying $450 or $543 a ton, and it could go up more, and we've seen potassium when it runs into short supply because it is a mined mineral. It takes a long time to increase supply. We know we can hit $1,000, and when we do, we know we need to do things differently, and probably not applying it in December is one of those things. But yeah, I mean, I think this just adds to what you were saying. So it's too late to fix it now because it's not going to affect your Brix if you put it on right now, obviously. And I don't think we're telling growers anything they don't know. But it's also a little late to fix it in the sense that you very poorly timed when it was time to build, because now potash is going to be more expensive. And we had a period of, I'd have to go back and look, but I would say at least 3, if not 6 years where potassium was historically, by historical measures, very inexpensive. There were days where it was under $300 a ton. So it was a great time to build. And I don't mean to rub anybody's noses in it, but I do think you want to pay attention to these markets and learn from those trends and take advantage of building potassium when you can.
Well, the other thing that hasn't been mentioned is, should you broadcast or ban? And a lot of times I think, because potassium can be bound up in the soil and it's not as readily mobile, there's, suggestions that it should be banded. And I would probably defer to you guys to let me know, do you think most growers do band it or broadcast?
That's a good question.
That is a good question.
I think we'd have to defer to growers.
Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't know, Kevin, since your dad is a grower, if, you had more access to that information from him talking with growers. Or
I've seen a lot of broadcasting.
Yeah. In his area, it's probably very close to universally broadcast with most of the growers in that area. There's a few that don't, and some of them are big, but if you were doing a grower count, I would say broadcasting is far more popular. And what I would say about broadcasting is I've seen roots in the row middles where people broadcast, and I've also seen, I've seen it work effectively. And the only other thing I would add is, and this becomes less important as the price of potash rises, and that's where we need to know about efficiency, is the cost of application is about 4 times to 6 times greater when you band.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because you obviously can't band effectively. There's a couple machines out there that sort of might exist. Nobody has them around here, but you can't band multiple rows. And
like they can,
growers broadcast between 3 and 5 rows, depending on the season and the spreader.
Well, the most important thing is to get it on.
Right.
That's,
Yeah.
And
Way to bring us back there, Andy. Nice job.
And that's one of the weeks with 3 weeks after bloom is you're pretty much dictating that it doesn't have to be banded, but you're going to do one row. You're going to do one row at a time because your canopy is big at that point.
Well, the other thing is, a question I'd like to ask Jen is, were you seeing that, symptoms mostly in these, and I would suspect you would be, mostly in those vineyards that had high tonnage? Or don't you, just generally you were looking around and you don't know?
Generally, I was looking around, and also the fact that it's not over the entire canopy, it's on the more mature leaves. So that's just a telltale sign that it is going a potassium deficiency.
I would say, if I had to guess, that, you're seeing that more in these vineyards that have really high tonnage.
Right.
Because, if we would have had a dry season, I think we would have found it, pretty much all over. because, the vines wouldn't be able to pick up that potassium.
That's it. Right.
But the fact that we've had so much rain, I would suspect that it's really mostly, if not entirely, in those vineyards that have, these high crop levels.
And all you have to do is pick up the leaves and they're just walls of fruit under there.
Yeah. Because in past seasons, in dry seasons, there were some seasons we found it all over the place. And even in vineyards that had moderate crop levels. But again, they were dry seasons.
Right.
Yeah, certainly we know the guidelines you have. If you follow those guidelines for the quantity in your soils and petioles, you come against the wrong year, you're going to see deficiency. I don't think we know if it pays to try to avoid deficiency during a drought, but we know that there are going to be, I don't know, 1 in 10 years or maybe more often, depending on climate change, but conditions that following those guidelines will produce a little bit of black leaf.
Yeah.
Now, I did have one question. I don't know if you know. So Dr. Bates was trying to induce some potassium deficiency for research work. And in a dry year, 2020 was able to do that almost immediately. But last I had heard for 2021, there was not potassium deficiency in that research trial anymore because of the rainfall. Do you know if there is now?
I don't know. I just know that he and I have been talking about it and we both have seen it across the belt, but he doesn't mention anything about the research trial of it.
Yeah, it will, I think, be interesting to watch just to see if, as a measure of how much easier or not easy this year was, because now we do have rainfall, but we also have higher crops. So give them some perspective on, what you've got to do to avoid deficiency when you've got a giant crop. So that'll be interesting to watch.
I'm sorry, I'm sitting here and everybody's emailing me on Friday afternoon. So can you hear all the dings going?
Oh yeah, I've got my notifications muted, but
sorry, I'm on a different.
It's going crazy. I don't know why. Everybody's trying to do their last email before they bail on Friday, apparently. Yeah, I think that's it for potash. Prices are high. It's not good, and it just happened as corn harvest begins in earnest. You go down to Georgia and it already started finished probably a long time ago, but the major acreage is starting to ripen. So to me, that may speak to what people are anticipating for 2022 in terms of field crops using potash relative to the available supply of potash. So, one data point does not make a trend. 15% in a week, though, is concerning. So we'll keep watching that and, maybe try some different things with potassium going forward for a year or two.
Now, before we get off the potassium, I would like to bring up, maybe discuss a little bit the maintenance levels of potassium, because I'm not sure all guys do that, but I think with talking with Terry in the past, he thinks that it's a good idea to at least have maintenance levels.
Right.
From your discussions with Terry, what do both of you think? Or could you comment on that?
Maintenance levels, we are absolutely important, we think. Now, like we were saying, Kevin and I were talking about it earlier on in the season, like if there was a time to not build your soil, like he had mentioned earlier, then maybe it would be this year with certain frost freeze events and the cost of everything. But we do suggest a maintenance dose, and a maintenance dose is 150 to 200 pounds per acre. And in my latest crop update, I actually have tissues and what the levels are, and if a wet year or excessively dry year, and what you should apply. And if you ever have questions, the growers out there, please do not hesitate to get a hold of me and we can sit down and talk about that. But that maintenance that you discuss, because it does get taken out every year, goes out with the fruit, should be 150 to 200 pounds per acre.
Now, I think, and probably some people do this, but I think in the past, a very common maintenance dose was 200 to 400 pounds every other year. I think that was probably fine when we had less drought stress and a slightly different climate and much smaller crops. that is not something I would do, especially with where potassium prices are. I think you're going to win if you buy potassium more often. And on top of that, obviously plants appreciate being fed more often. And the $17 to $20 an acre it costs to broadcast if you're broadcasting, if we decide that broadcasting is okay, even though it's not currently recommended by research, is insignificant relative to the cost of potassium. So you can apply it many, many times if you're willing to broadcast, and it's not a big deal. But I think we need to make sure broadcasting works, and then I think be realistic. If we're going to have 8 to 10 to 12 ton crops, we need to do it every year, not every other year at a higher rate.
I agree.
All right, Andy. Did you see some bugs?
Oh, yeah. Always have my eye out for the bugs. Yeah, I was out Tuesday, and at this point in the season, there's not a whole heck of a lot you can really do as far as the insects. I mean, if you haven't done it by now, but what you can do as far as grape berry moth is you can get out there in your vineyard blocks and before harvest gets going, and see those different areas, especially your high and severe risk sites and where you've had a history of problems. Go out there and record where this is occurring, what the injury levels are in those areas, and record it on your vineyard maps. And hopefully you have vineyard maps. For years we've been talking about vineyard maps, and they could get them free through Clairol. And hopefully guys would go out, check the level of injury at these areas, and then post it on your maps so that you can go back in the winter time and look over where those injury levels were, how high they were, and compare it with your spray program. And then you can see if there's adjustments that needed to be made. It's going to depend on your coverage naturally, what materials you used, how many times you applied, and timings. So hopefully growers are using the NUA model, the berry moth model in NUA, to time their applications. And so then you can compare in the wintertime, when you have more time, how effective your program was, and if you need to make adjustments. And if you do, growers can contact me concerning developing a program maybe for next year if they weren't happy with the results of this year. So that's about the only thing for berry moth. And the other thing, naturally, when you are in those areas that hide berry moth injury, there were a lot of fruit flies in those areas. And that's natural because fruit flies are attracted to injured fruit. So the berry moth areas that have high injury levels going to have higher levels of fruit flies. Now, we're not really concerned with fruit flies in Concords, but in wine grapes we are, because they're a major contributor to sour rot. And so we're not recommending for Concord growers to put on applications of insecticides for fruit flies. But if you have susceptible wine grape varieties, tight clustered varieties like Riesling, Vignoble, Pinot Noir, then there's a good chance that if you have injury in these clusters, and even just splitting, you don't even have to have berry moth injury. It could be splitting because the clusters are tight, maybe splitting from rainfall. There's chances in there that you're going to have sour rot problems. And so the recommendation is that about 15 bricks that you apply insecticides to control the fruit flies, and also to put on a sterilant like Oxidate, or even in some of the past crop updates, Brian mentioned Fracture. And I guess Fracture is what is it? Oh, I have to come back to that. They this year, I think they named it different. It was sold. I'll think of that in a second, but again, the insecticides are real important to control fruit flies. And again, I'm going to mention though that the recommendation was at about 15 bricks weekly applications. Now again, they have found Greg Loeb in some of his research up in the Finger Lakes, they have found resistance to some of these materials. So for instance, some of the pyrethroids like Mustang Max, organophosphates, malathion, and even I think neonics, the Assail. They have found that in certain populations of vineyards in the Finger Lakes, they have found some resistance. So I just want to bring that up to growers that if they are going to putting on these materials, that to be aware of the resistance potential and to mix up your modes of action. Don't keep applying, say, your pyrethroids every time. Mix it up, delegate the spinosins. I don't think there's been any indication yet that there is resistance to materials like delegate. So just keep that in mind if you are going to be, you have the wine grape varieties, you're worried about sour rot, to mix it up as far as your insecticides.
Andy, that's great advice. And I'd like to just let everybody out there know that Cornell puts out a veraison to harvest and we send it out to our growers. And if you're looking for that 15 bricks or kind of watching to see where you are, you can check out that and see what they are around the belt. If you're not taking your own samples, which I do recommend that you do.
Sure. Actually, that's exactly what I was going to say is one of the things Andy mentioned wine grapes, but one of the things that would be interesting, and I think at this point in the season, all you could do is learn from it. Going forward, it's probably too late to spray, but take a look at your Niagaras, see what the bricks are and see what kind of damage you see in there, secondary rots. If you have a nice 14-ton crop of Niagaras, they're probably looking pretty good because they still have a lot of acid in them. But if you're at 15 bricks by the time or 16 bricks, which I doubt, but if you had some frost damage or something, I think the lightest processor is going to start next week. So it's obviously too late to spray, but I would watch those bricks and use that, and bricks and crop load, use that to consider some of these spray applications, because we do know with late season Niagara, when they were really trying to reach 15 bricks and maybe doing it in mid-October, there was a ton of fruit loss.
Yeah,
Andy, the other thing is fracture, and I'm just going to say it because it doesn't mean anything to me, but maybe it'll refresh your recollection. Fracture's active ingredient is blad. It's a naturally occurring seed storage protein in sweet lupins.
Sweet lupins.
So I assume based on that label, it's an expensive product, but I don't know.
I don't know either, but again, last year they sold it, and I think this year it was under the ProBlad. I think I'm pronouncing this right. ProBlad Verde. That's the name of it now, and I know that it does list sour rot as one of the controls. I haven't seen any research on how well it has worked specifically myself.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure. I know Brian has mentioned that, but the research that was done by Megan and Wayne, it was using oxidate as far as So and that again, that's not for that's not an insecticide. That's a sterilant for the bacteria, control the bacteria.
Right.
So oxidate has the research I've seen on that, but as far as the fracture or the ProBlad Verde, I have not seen that. And
it is a completely different mode of action. It's its own thing. So, if you need something, I think obviously you want to know how well it works, but for next year, if you're
and I'm not sure if there is any research going on with that material. I would like to see someone to do some of that research, or if it has been done, to get information on that, before we recommend it.
Sure.
So
Something to watch for, though, for sure.
yeah, at least it's a little different, because the only other thing is the oxidate, and it would be nice to have some other materials.
What does that noise mean, Jen?
That means I just sent you both an email.
Oh, we're boring her. I see.
Oh.
I just got the email. It says, shut your mouth and move on.
No, it says revision to harvest week 3. I want to make sure you guys can have it to get it out there.
So if we're wrapping up on insects, I did want to talk about people.
Oh,
Sure.
I'm not sure that's apropos.
Which are, more interesting than insects.
No, I don't know about that.
They're a little more unpredictable.
Yeah.
So one of the things we've seen, and I don't think it's going to affect anywhere near all the growers this year. It's certainly affecting the larger harvest crews first. If you have 2 to 3 harvesters with, especially if they work 2 shifts or 3 shifts, and you're harvesting 500, 1,000, 2,000 acres, you have turnover. A lot of our guys that harvest 200-300 acres, they might keep 2 guys for 10, 20, 30 years, and they don't have any turnover. But for the people who do have turnover, they're going to see this first, or somebody who just randomly had 1 person turnover, even though they usually have a long-term employee doing this stuff for them. We are seeing the labor shortage severely impact that skill set of labor. So beyond pruning crews and beyond what we would usually consider handwork, it is impacting sort of what I think in agriculture we would consider more medium skilled labor. Typically that is identified as fairly low skill labor in economic measures, just because typically skill is sort of defined based on how you pay them, and they don't get paid very well. So it's considered low skill, even though it does take skill. So you get grouped in that when you do an economic measurement. And that is useful, because that's usually where you see pressure divided. It's pressure on wages, and supply of labor is usually related to how much they earn. And so a lot of times most of the time you see the top 25% of earners getting the largest raises. They are the people that are most sought after and harder to acquire. Certainly people that work in certain sectors of the economy where there's a shortage. I mean, you might be talking about Google, or at the very least, high skilled employers, even outside of tech, but in chemistry and things like that, where we just have a long-term shortage. Those are where you typically see the higher aggressive sort of hiring things happening. And that's not what we're seeing right now. We've seen that turn completely upside down, and the lower the skill level, the higher and faster wages are rising. And it's not just wages. So just to sort of try to illustrate it, I'll talk about something anecdotally. Walmart raised their pay for the 3rd time in a year. These 3 raises impact the pay of more than 1 million employees. And this is their bottom tier of employees. They now receive a wage of $16.50, and starting wages for Walmart are up 50% since 2015. And this, I use Walmart, but this trend is not limited to Walmart. You take a look at the crop update, and you can see the chart in terms of where wage rates are going for the bottom 25% of workers, and they're up 4 or 5% a month, or 7%, depending on which month you're looking at. The most acute pressure right now still probably appears to be on the retail and service industries, not necessarily agriculture, but nobody really measures agriculture in the same way. So, we've seen restaurants locally closing down because of a lack of labor.
Yes.
But we know that we compete very indirectly with that source of labor. We don't get people with master's degrees driving tractors. I mean, they can work at a if you can make $25 at Walmart, then that's probably an easier job than most grape harvesting crews. So you've got to offer something competitive. And I think my advice is, if you still need an employee, be very, very aggressive. both inside and outside of agriculture, we've seen signing bonuses, completion bonuses. We know this is seasonal work. It's very valuable if they make it through the entire season. So a bonus for that is becoming much more common. Overtime makes things very tricky because in New York, you're going to have to pay overtime. A lot of times what agriculture relied on is you can make a ton of money because you can work 80, 90, 100 hours a week. And I can afford to pay you that because I'm paying you $15, $20 an hour, no matter how many hours you work. And a lot of employers in California and New York, where you have to pay time and a half, have been hiring more people to avoid that expense. And so then the employees make less. And now they're seeing their employees look to make up that difference in higher pay anyway. So if you need people, be very aggressive. And if you don't need people, I would still be somewhat aggressive because you want to keep the people that you have. And I think you should pay attention to what's going on in the market and expect for them to be offered better opportunities than what you're offering them if you haven't made any significant changes in your payroll in 10 years. And I know most people probably haven't, certainly in New York, merely because minimum wage has gone up, but that's not going to cut it. Certainly minimum wage isn't going to cut it. And I think almost all growers probably know that. But more importantly, I think in Pennsylvania, where the regulations haven't necessarily forced you to bring up your payroll, whether it's hourly or bonuses or something to offer incentives, there isn't that regulation. You want to make sure you do it anyway to keep employees. I'm not saying you have to pay $50 an hour. I'm just saying whatever you're doing, I would be aggressive and I would take a look at what you're doing and look at, try to get some feedback from your employees to see, if they're working for you because they love you and, they could go somewhere else and get $1 an hour extra, or they could go somewhere else and get $10 an hour extra. And if it's the latter, they probably don't love you quite that much. So be careful and be somewhat aggressive about that. The other thing we've seen is food, uniforms, transportation. These are temporary positions that sometimes require very long hours, and taking that burden off of them is sometimes less expensive than just paying them more. And the other thing is, in New York with the transportation issue, DWIs have become a very serious offense in New York. And there's a large population that's not being recruited for labor, even though they might know how to operate a crane or an excavator or have 10 years of experience running tractors, because they are never going to get a driver's license again, or they're not going to get it for 5 years. So they cannot get a job with National Fuel or whomever that can definitely pay more than you. You can recruit those people, but you're going to have to drive them around. And a lot of times that's going to be a bargain for you. So if you can work that out, I mean, these things are headaches. It's not easy to hire people anymore. It's not like you throw them a few dollars and you get excellent people. But if you go through, trying to figure out what they need and want, you can probably get the least expensive people that are qualified to do the work for, the most efficient way you can get them. You pay somebody who has 3 DWIs $30 an hour, it doesn't matter. They might try to show up, they might lie, they might drive, and then they get caught in the middle of the season, and then you don't have an employee. So it's much easier to pay them less and try to figure out these other issues for them, whether it's food, uniforms, or transportation, bonuses, signing bonuses, completion bonuses, all that stuff.
Now, Kevin, let me ask you, are growers doing this, or have you talked to growers and they're taking this tactic?
I mean, I have not talked to a grower who said, yeah, I literally did all that stuff, but I have talked to lots of growers who have done at least one of those things. Yes.
Okay.
Well, and I'm sitting here worried, and Kevin, I usually like to let you be the, I almost said Danny Downer, the little rain cloud that comes over.
Sure.
I try to be the song and dance here, but prices are up this year. So it seems like everything would be great. I mean, prices are up this year, but so is labor, and so is potash. And so are we just breaking even like as other years, or?
It's not a good year to have really severe frost damage, because you don't get paid for grapes you don't have. But certainly growers are going to be more profitable than they typically are with a large crop. So yes, will harvest cost you more in two ways? Yes, it will cost more to harvest 12 ton to the acre than it does 8 or even 6. And it will cost more because the labor is more expensive. But that is way more than offset by higher prices and larger crops. Like nobody ever wished for a smaller crop or a lower price just because, they could pay $16 an hour instead of 17.
You are a ray of sunshine.
And the other good piece of news, although I have not seen it impact anything, anecdotally, I've heard employers complaining about it, but we know that unemployment benefits were extremely generous. And often people could make more on unemployment for a little while last year than they could working. You can't do that now, and you haven't been able to do that recently, but all of the extra benefits have just recently expired. So to the extent that there was truth that was hampering recruitment, that's gone. I still firmly believe that if you pay enough and you don't have to go crazy, that you would recruit people off of unemployment, certainly after the second round where they lowered that benefit to, I think they cut it by 50%. And before that, I don't know. Sometimes it's nice to have a vacation and get paid anyway. But after that, I think for the last 6 months, I think you could pay your way out of that problem. But now that's gone. So to the extent that was a problem, if it was a problem, you don't have to worry about that. Now you have to worry about everybody else is raising their wages. So you have to too.
Got it.
All right. Thank you all for joining us. This was I think a lengthy episode of Between the Vines, but that was not totally outside of our plan or goal. We wanted to give you information for harvest. And, the other thing is, if you find this overwhelming because you're one of 50% of our listeners that get on your desktop and stream this, reach out to us if you have a smartphone, and we can try to help you get this into your tractor, and you don't have to spend, you're not going to, I know you're not, but you don't have to spend 2 hours after you're done harvesting for 14 listening to this to get this information. Give us a call, even if you're, driving around in circles. We'll take your call, and I think I can help you walk through setting this up if you've got some sort of mobile device. But thanks again for joining us. If you have any questions or things you want to hear about on this podcast, please also reach out with those tips. Thanks a lot.
Have a great week.